One of the biggest questions for the future of the DCU is who's going to play Batman, and in this video I'm going to attempt to answer that question by talking about 12 different actors who I think could be in the running for the role. At the end I will give my top 3 candidates and then finally make the call of who I think the DCU should choose as the next Dark Knight. Let's get into the list. I think over the last year or so people have cooled on this name a bit, but I know there are a lot of supporters for this actor still, and he's probably the face of DCU Batman fan casting for me, and that is Brandon Sklenar. Now I've talked about this casting in the past, but that was about a year and a half ago, and since then I've seen a bit more of his work in things like Drop as well as The Housemaid, and I have to admit, even after seeing more of his work, my opinion on Sklenar remains relatively the same. To be clear, I actually liked both of those movies, and I thought Sklenar specifically stood out and had a pretty fun performance in Housemaid. However, neither performance really made me view him any differently as an actor. I did not walk away thinking he was a better dramatic actor, nor did I think he'd be a better fit for something like Bruce Wayne. When it comes to Sklenar, I still think all of the appeal for him as Batman comes down to his physique and his low booming voice. There is no denying he could step into the Batsuit today and arguably be the most physically fit Batman we have seen, plus with his powerful voice he could arguably be the most intimidating. However, I'm just not convinced he'd be a great Bruce Wayne. Yes, I have seen the clips from 1923 where he's wearing his suit and there's no denying he is good looking, but just because he looks good does not mean he is ready to be Bruce Wayne. Maybe if he didn't have facial hair or a huge mustache in pretty much every project that I've seen him in, I'd be able to better see the connection. However, the main reason I'm so skeptical as him as a Bruce is because so far his resume as an actor isn't all that impressive in terms of its variability. He kind of plays the same one-note character in a lot of these projects. Maybe he is an amazing actor that simply has been typecasted because of his looks, but I just wish there was one random role where he did more than just yell, act tough and mysterious, plus be handsome of course. To be fair, I have yet to see him in a project where I thought he was bad either, so perhaps this is just a matter of needing to put him in the right project for him to showcase his wider range of abilities. I certainly see the potential, but Sklenar will definitely not be a part of my top 3 contenders at the end of this video, because if he were casted, I wouldn't be against the idea, but I would definitely need to see it to believe it, and maybe he would blow me away and end up being the perfect choice, but I'm just not that excited by the idea as of right now. Another popular name who I do think is mostly known for his good looks, but I would say has also showcased some good charm, and is definitely one of the bigger household names on this list, is Glen Powell. Now when it comes to Powell, he definitely seems like somebody that would be one of WB's top choices for the role, as he is an up-and-coming star with a huge social media following, some pretty solid wins at the box office domestically with things like Twisters and Anyone But You. Plus, even though this is not quantifiable, he truly does seem to have some great charisma and is almost exactly what studios drool over when it comes to looking for somebody to lead a big franchise for them. As an actor, I do think he falls into somewhat of a similar category as somebody like Sklenar, where he does play a lot of the same roles, where he is really good at coming off as the overly confident, buff, muscular guy, but to his credit, even though his characters can be dicks at times, he does typically give them a little bit more depth, which makes some of his characters come off as at least slightly likable by the end of the movie. Plus, over the last few years, due to his rising in popularity, he has spread his wings a little bit and done some more unique roles in things like Hitman, How to Make a Killing, as well as Devotion, just to name a few, as well as I actually thought he was pretty good in Running Man, where in these roles, I wouldn't say they are, game changing. It's not like he's, going and chasing Oscars, but he is starting to show more depth as an actor and show more range. It does make me more confident in his ability actually as an actor and whether or not he'd be able to take on the task of playing Batman. But focusing in on Batman, when it comes to Glen Powell, there is one thing that I think he would absolutely be able to knock out of the park, and that is the socialite playboy aspect of Bruce Wayne. He probably would be one of the best actors we will talk about in this video at that aspect of Bruce, but that's like what, 10, maybe 20% of being a good Bruce Wayne slash Batman. When it comes to the dark and brooding, I have a bit more questions. There's no doubt Glen Powell has the build physically to look like Batman, but I'm not entirely sure I buy him as somebody that can be intimidating. Can he showcase the darkness and the inner turmoil that Bruce experiences and that is always bubbling beneath the surface? He almost feels a bit too clean for Batman, and if there's one previous Batman actor he reminds me of a lot, it's probably George Clooney. Which, to be fair to George, he was dealt a really shit hand with Batman and Robin, and I don't think you could have put basically anybody as Batman in that movie and had the movie itself turn out any good, so I think that colors our experience with him as Batman in a pretty negative light. I am sure there is a universe in which he could have been a great Batman, as I do think he's a talented actor as he has shown in the time since then, and maybe Glen Powell could avenge George Clooney in the DCU, but I worry that leaning more into the charm and maybe making Batman a bit more fun and campy, which I definitely think is a possibility with somebody like Glen Powell, because so much of his appeal as an actor is his charm, that could be a risk that could blow up in DC's face if they don't don't balance it correctly. And I'm not against making Batman a bit more fun, which I know to some people that is completely like alarm sounding, totally against it. Batman needs to always be super dark and brooding. And yes, Batman does still need to be brooding, but there are versions of the character which are a bit more fun. They lean a bit more into the dry sense of humor that Batman has, and that's a quality about Batman that I really love, and I would love to see that. And I think Glen Powell would absolutely be able to kill that aspect, but again, I don't know if I really buy him as the Dark Knight, and honestly, casting Powell as Batman feels a bit like a waste of what Glen Powell's best traits are. He works really well in comedy. He works well being charming, being, you know, the center of attention and stuff like that. And I honestly do think he probably possesses the acting ability to do this, and from a business perspective, I don't know if you could have a more like strategically sound decision when it comes to casting a Batman for all of the actors we're going to talk about on this list, because he already does have a pretty big set of fans. But ultimately, when I think of Glen Powell as Batman, it just feels like a miscast to me. I'll still dream of what could have been Glen Powell's version of Hal Jordan, because that I think was a match made in heaven. For this next one, I'm gonna just be forthright and admit, when it comes to this actor's work, I've exclusively seen it all on YouTube, as this actor has not really been in any projects that fall into my overall interest, and hell, if we're gonna be honest, they really haven't been in a whole lot in general, especially domestically, but James Gunn seemingly loves him, and because of that, I think we might be talking about one of the most likely to be casted, and that is Tom Brittney, who, for those of you unfamiliar, was one of the final actors in the running for Superman, and James Gunn has gone out of his way on several occasions to compliment Tom Brittney as an actor, and it almost feels a little inevitable that he's going to join the DCU at some point. The only question is what role. Now, for my sleuthing on YouTube, I do have to say I can somewhat see the vision. Now, I have to admit, watching just clips on YouTube is kind of like just watching an athlete's highlights. You're just seeing the best moments, and it lacks the depth of a true film study where you can get more of the full picture. So maybe in some of these projects he is just dreadful, but his one role specifically in Grantchester I do think showcases some of the things that I do think could be pretty transferable to Batman. In the show, he's fairly brooding, stern, able to come off as even slightly intimidating, but he's also compassionate, remorseful, and he does have a deep voice that does sound pretty smooth, and I do think has the potential if he were to don the cowl. Without watching a whole lot of Brittney, I cannot make any declaration as to whether or not I think he's truly a good actor, but if James Gunn thinks he's got a lot of potential, I'm gonna just defer to him, as he's pretty damn good with the whole casting thing. Brittney also seems to have at least a good frame for Batman, standing in at 6'2". He may not be as jacked as some of the other actors right now, but he definitely has a solid build with some room to add on, and as we have seen many times with these superhero roles, that is something that is quite achievable. Just look at the transformation David Corenswet went through before Superman, and Brittney would be much closer to his Batman build than Corenswet was to his Superman build. When it comes to Brittney, I cannot say I would be amped up by this casting, because again, I cannot say I am the most familiar with his work, but I do love when a lesser known actor finally gets their big break in something like this, because I have no idea what to expect, and I think it's far easier to just see the character instead of a star actor who I have seen in countless films over the years. And like I said earlier, James Gunn believes in his acting abilities, so maybe I should just drop that whole point completely, because what the hell do I know compared to James Gunn? If James Gunn believes in him enough to give him Batman, I probably should just be excited, but I do think that's an argument that I could basically make for any actor we're going to talk about. Alan Ritchson is another very popular Batman fan cast, mostly because of his work on the hit Amazon series Reacher, where he plays a character that definitely has some shades of Batman with his quiet, stoic demeanor and his immense physicality. So I understand why a lot of people make the connection, but for me, it's just a no. And that's so difficult for me to admit, because I absolutely love Ritchson's work. Reacher truly is one of my favorite ongoing series right now, and I am basically counting down the days until season 4. But for me, Ritchson will always hold a special place in my heart for his work as That Castle in Blue Mountain State, which is a show I am sure plenty of people think is too raunchy and incredibly stupid, which it kind of is. But the show was an absolute staple of late college nights, hanging out with friends, and the best part of that show was Alan Ritchson's That Castle. Now, is That Castle a role that transfers over to Batman? Absolutely not. But I wanted to make it very clear to the Ritchson supporters out there, I do love him, but I just don't know if I see him fit for the role, especially as Bruce Wayne. There's no denying he would be an absolute brute in the suit, and if you gave him an exact replica of the suit from Batman Arkham City, he would almost look like a spitting image of that version of the character, considering Ritchson stands in at 6'3" and is basically built like a demigod. Just visually, he definitely would look like a Batman that could hold his own in a universe of gods and monsters, and shit, he may even make Corenswet's Superman look a little small, but as cool as it would be to get a hulking version of the Dark Knight, looks only matter so much, and as an actor, I don't think Ritchson is proven worthy enough to take on the cowl. Again, we can make the argument for every actor on this list that maybe this is the chance that they need, and if approved by James Gunn, they probably do possess the talent talent. However, we're not James Gunn, we're not looking at the auditions for this, we have to judge these actors based on the work they've actually put out, and when it comes to Alan Ritchson's acting career, it's not filled with that much else than being just the big tough guy who stars in action movies and shows. I will say, outside of Reacher, recently Ritchson gave what I would consider to be his best performance in a movie, that being War Machine, which first off is a great movie. I absolutely recommend you watch. If you haven't, it's nothing groundbreaking, but I think it's a very fun action movie and one of my favorite films Netflix has done in a very long time, and Ritchson in it is absolutely phenomenal. Even though it does feel quite familiar to a lot of Ritchson's previous roles, I do think he is tasked with a little more in terms of emotion and acting subtly, as well as he's just leading a film, which is something that he hasn't done a whole lot in his career. One big positive I will give Ritchson, though, is I do feel every time Ritchson has been challenged to do more in a movie or show, he has risen to that challenge. So perhaps in the hands of a great director, he could absolutely knock Batman out of the park, but with Ritchson, I think he operates at his absolute peak when he's allowed to have a little fun, and to me, Batman may feel a little bit too much like Reacher, just with a bat costume and with a bit more socialite activity. Even though Ritchson won't be in my final top 3 contenders, I certainly wouldn't be upset by the choice. Hell, I'd be cautiously optimistic, but for me personally, if I got a notification that said Alan Ritchson was casted as the DCU's version of Shazam, or even Wildcat, I'd probably be jumping for joy, may even pop some champagne or throw something on the grill, because I think he would be absolutely perfect in those two roles. My personal favorite actor that we're going to talk about in this video is Jake Gyllenhaal, and he is somebody who I have no doubt possesses the acting ability to pull off the character. However, if I'm being honest, as much as I would be excited by the idea, I'm not sure it'd be a great fit for Gyllenhaal. Plus, even though I do think he looks phenomenal at the age of 45, he may be pushing the limit when it comes to how old they want Batman to be in the DCU. I do think we will most likely be getting a more seasoned version of the character, considering we know Damian will already be Robin. Plus, I think it's a wise decision to help differentiate this new version of the character from Pattinson's take on the character, but 45 now and presumably like 47 or 48 when The Brave and the Bold comes out might just be too old. Maybe it's not, I guess, considering what we have seen the DCU do with Hal Jordan. Clearly DC Studios is not afraid of aging up some of their more iconic characters, but I imagine the plan for Batman is to be around for a very long time coming, and potentially having a Batman who is 50 by the time we get our first Justice League movie could be a risk not worth taking. Now, focusing back in on Gyllenhaal, he still is in phenomenal shape physically, and even though he is 45, he definitely looks more like somebody in his 30s, which is something that can be said for some other actors we will soon talk about, so perhaps I'm overrating the whole age thing, considering we have seen a lot of actors age very gracefully, even into their 60s, but in terms of looks, for whatever reason, when I see him, I just do not see Bruce Wayne, even when he is clean shaven and with his hair in a more clean manner. I do think the need to look like Bruce Wayne ripped off the comic book page is something that is extremely overrated. I get it for fan cast, but if you lined up all of the Batman actors that we have had over the years, there are some very drastically different faces, some of which don't even really look like Bruce Wayne from the comics. But when it comes to Gyllenhaal, the reason I more so bring up the fact that I do not see him as Bruce is because I just see Jake Gyllenhaal, and I think Jake is the tier of actor that might simply be too big for this type of role. Plus, in terms of Jake's work as an actor, even though he can excel at being dark and brooding, almost all of my favorite roles of his have been these really weird, freaky, and a lot of times creepy characters where he just gets to let loose and do crazy shit, like Lou Bloom or Donnie Darko. Of course, Gyllenhaal has been in so many projects over his very long career and has showcased himself as a capable actor of playing all different types of characters, so it may just be my own personal preference, but whenever I think of Jake doing a DC movie and what characters he could potentially play, my mind always drifts more towards the villainous role. Jake Gyllenhaal is probably my second favorite actor, if not my favorite actor in the entire world, so even though I am being critical of this potential casting, I have no doubt I'd be amped up if he was casted in the role, because even though I may have questions about the fit and whether or not this is the right role for him, one thing I do know for sure is that he absolutely possesses the talent to deliver a top tier performance, and I'm not sure there is a more talented actor that we will talk about in this video. Perhaps the biggest rising star on this list, or maybe by now he is just a star considering he's been around for a few years, but I think people really started taking him a bit more seriously as an actor after his very good performance as Frankenstein's monster, and that is Jacob Elordi. Now, there are two things that immediately seem to be negatives for Elordi's case for the role. The first being the fact that he's only 29 years old as of right now and might be too young for what Gunn and company might be looking for. Now, I think it's much easier for somebody like Elordi to play a little older than it is for somebody much older to play younger, so I personally wouldn't reject his audition if I was the casting director for that reason alone, but I understand why it might be a deal breaker for some. The second thing that could be an issue is the fact that he is 6'4", if not 6'5", which would be by far the biggest and lankiest Batman we have ever seen on screen. He's basically basically built like David Corenswet. Now I would say Elordi has a bit more natural muscle and is just a bit maybe more broader, especially with his shoulders, than David Corenswet was before he got the part of Superman. And don't get me wrong, Corenswet put in a lot of work to put on size, but he definitely is more tall and lanky than he is Brick Shithouse. And in my own headcanon, I've always imagined Batman being slightly shorter than Superman and slightly more compact. But if Elordi is cast, we may have a Batman slightly taller, which I totally get should not be a big deal. And whenever they are on screen together, they could just shoot it in a way where we wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But for some reason, it just feels off as I'm trying to like imagine it in my head. Most likely because growing up in the 2000s, Batman in comics, games, and animation has typically been depicted as being much more buff and bodybuilder-esque. Perhaps the vision is more like how Kelly Jones or Neil Adams depicted the character, which is still definitely jacked, but a bit taller and lankier and leaner, especially Jones, which is some of the craziest looks for Batman you will ever see, and some of the coolest Batman art you will ever see just in general. The way he drew Batman was almost like demonic. When it comes to the Elordi as an actor, I will say I've not seen all of Euphoria, but I have seen things like Saltburn, Frankenstein, and Priscilla, where he has showcased potential as an actor, but I'm not entirely sure yet if I buy him as a Bruce Wayne. He definitely seems to excel with more darker, more rage-filled portrayals. He has a voice that I think would work for the character, and I think he has the look of a Bruce Wayne, just, you know, with the typically dark hair, and he has a pretty boy face. But I just wish there were a few more projects where I could say, yeah, I think this guy has it as an actor and is ready to be Batman and lead a Batman franchise in the DCU. One interesting note on Elordi is the fact that he was asked to audition for Superman, but turned it down because he was not interested. Now, there's no way to know whether or not he would give the same response for Batman, who I do think is one of the few characters that always attracts more talent, and Elordi did not say he would never do a superhero movie in his life. He just said it wasn't the time now and he wasn't really interested, but never say never. But I do also think we could be talking about an actor who wouldn't even be interested in auditioning. Elordi is someone who I guess I'm conflicted about. Outside of Frankenstein, I cannot say I've been a massive fan of any project I've seen him in, but I do think he has shown some promise as an actor. He physically would be different from anybody we have seen, and I think he has a pretty big following of fans that would make him to be an attractive choice financially for the role. He definitely may be young, but with his experience with WB, I would not be shocked at all if he was asked to audition, and if he blew an audition out of the water, it's very possible he could end up getting this role, because I'm sure there'd be some higher ups at WB that would love to hand it to him. If he was casted, I certainly wouldn't be mad. I don't know if I'd be super excited. It's a weird middle ground with Elordi. I definitely see the talent, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was casted and he knocked it out of the park, but I also am just not a huge fan of his work so far, so it's a weird middle ground I'm having a hard time reconciling. Paul Anthony Kelly is an actor that I've already talked about in the past on this channel, so I may keep this section a little brief because my opinion really hasn't changed that much since I last talked about him, but I certainly would be interested in the choice. I think he'd be perfect as a socialite playboy Bruce Wayne. He looks almost identical to Bruce Wayne ripped off a comic book page, and I do think he showcased some solid acting ability in Love Story, where he played JFK Jr., somebody who has also dealt with immense family tragedy, the weight of insane expectation, and I just think in the show he came off as quite charismatic, but damaged as well. However, even though I do think there's quite a lot of potential as Bruce Wayne, he is somebody who is relatively inexperienced as an actor, and with that comes the question whether or not he would be able to shoulder the pressure of leading a franchise like this, as well as the fact that he might just be a bad actor. Lots of people can be great in one thing, it's whether or not he has the ability to consistently deliver, and Batman is unlike anything he has ever done before. Plus, I simply have no idea if he has what it takes to pull off the Batman part of the character. Can he be the intimidating presence in the suit that is supposed to strike fear in the hearts of criminals? Can he be a presence that does not look out of place when standing alongside the likes of Superman and Wonder Woman? I truly have no idea. He definitely seems quite fit, and I think with some weight training he could definitely pack on some more weight to make him look the part, but I have yet to see him be powerful and intimidating. If Gunn were to choose him, I'd be relatively excited, as that would be both a vote of confidence in his acting ability and the idea that he has the force to be intimidating as the Dark Knight, but I simply need to see a lot more from him as an actor before I would say he is some sort of slam dunk choice to take on the role. It seems his workload is going to increase dramatically over the next year or two thanks to Love Story, so maybe in a few years we will have a much clearer answer to whether or not he's actually ready, but there's no denying in my opinion that the potential is there. A fan favorite actor that has done extensive animation work with DC over the years and is probably the second most popular Batman fan cast that I have personally seen besides Brandon Sklenar is Jensen Ackles. And even though I understand why fans want to see this, because Ackles seems like a very likable guy who wants this role, and I thought he did a solid job voicing Batman in the Tomorrowverse, where even though the movies were not that great, I thought his casting was very solid, but when it comes to the casting of him potentially as the live action version of the character, it's just a no for me. Similar to Jake Gyllenhaal, Ackles looks great, and even though I think he would maybe have to bulk up a little bit more, he does have a good physique that definitely definitely seems fit for a Batman, but he's already 48, making it very likely that his first appearance as Batman would be in his 50s, which just feels a little too old. Again, he could still look amazing into his 60s, so maybe I shouldn't hold too much against him, but there is one major difference between Ackles and Gyllenhaal, and that's the fact that Gyllenhaal is a world-renowned theatrical actor who has worked with some of the best in the business and has delivered Oscar-worthy performances. Ackles, on the other hand, is for the most part a career TV actor that I really don't think has shown all that much variety in his work over the years, and has typically been typecasted into the macho, hotshot, tough guy type role. There are perhaps some things from his previous work that are transferable to Batman, like his amazing voice, his experience with action, and at times he's shown able to showcase emotional depth, but he's never really showcased that much range as an actor, and he would feel like a relatively uninspiring choice for the role. I love the fact that he seems to love DC and wants to take on Batman, and if he were to be casted, I truly would be rooting for him, but it would definitely not leave a whole lot for the imagination, as I feel like I know exactly what we would be getting from his take on the character. I've already heard it, and I don't really think putting him in live action will make it all that different. Also, another underrated thing that could potentially make his casting a bit difficult is the fact that he might be pretty preoccupied with Vought Rising, an upcoming prequel series to The Boys, where his character Soldier Boy is set to play a large role for several seasons to come. I'm sure there'd be some way to make the schedules work out, but typically whenever Marvel or DC cast someone in a large leading role, they don't typically want to share their actors with any other large franchises. And it's just another negative to add to Jensen Ackles' potential resume when it comes to applying for the Batman role, and mixed with the fact that he's a bit older and the fact that he doesn't really have a whole lot of theatrical experience. I just think it's very unlikely that he's going to get the role. I also believe there are a lot better choices, but I really do like Jensen Ackles the person, so I'd be rooting for him if he got this. An actor that, depending on what pictures you see, almost feels like Bruce Wayne ripped off the comic book page is Mann, and to me, I understand the hype for the looks, but I do not know how anyone can say with any confidence that Mann is up to the task as an actor to be the next Dark Knight. Now I'll admit, I have not seen all of his work, but I have seen things like Licorice Pizza and Masters of the Air, which in the latter he was actually really good, and arguably the best character in the show in my opinion. He's charismatic, brave, he has a real presence on screen without going over the top, he's got a voice that I definitely think could work, and just based on the performance, I do like a lot of what he has to offer. However, similar to Paul Anthony Kelly, I think it's so hard to know whether or not he's actually good for the role because of how little experience he has, and giving him the keys to something like Batman could be a bit risky, but based on the little I have seen, I would not be surprised if he absolutely blew his audition out of the water and runs away with the role. For some, he may be a bit small, only coming in at 6 feet, and he certainly isn't very muscle bound, but if he was given about 6 months and some lifts in his shoes, I think he would certainly be able to look the part. Also, Mann is only 29 years old, which, similar to somebody like Elordi, could take him out of the running if DC is looking for someone a bit older. Even though Masters of the Air is just one performance, and it's not like he is the absolute main star of that show, I do think that singular performance is really damn good and showcases a lot of potential in Mann's acting ability. He's got the face of Bruce Wayne, and I do think he gets the benefit of being a bit of an unknown actor, which gets a couple of extra bonus points from me. Again, I cannot say whether or not he is up to the challenge, or even if he's truly a good actor, but Mann definitely seems like a high upside swing that could absolutely be a home run, and he reminds me a lot of David Corenswet and where Corenswet was before he got the role of Superman. Corenswet, I would say, was a little bit more known because he had been in a bit more high profile projects. However, I definitely think if James Gunn said, yeah, this guy has the talent acting wise to pull off this role, we could be talking about how perfect he is in the role as Batman in a couple years from now. Next up is an actor who I personally love, but sadly I also think is probably too old for the role now, and that is Josh Hartnett. He also maybe wouldn't be interested as he has turned down opportunities in the past to star in superhero flicks, but I'm just telling you right now, if he was say 5 or 6 years younger, he would probably be my personal top choice for this role. I understand there'd be questions about whether he would have the look in the suit, and whether or not he possesses the ability to ultimately be the imposing, terrifying presence the Dark Knight is often tasked with being, but as an actor, I think Hartnett has shown a wide range of ability to play whatever is asked of him, and I absolutely think he'd be an amazing choice as Bruce Wayne, especially as the older fatherly figure we might be getting in The Brave and the Bold. I get to some, he may not look like Bruce Wayne ripped off a comic page, but again, the whole needing to look exactly like Bruce from the comics point is something that I really don't care about. Keaton looks nothing like most interpretations of Batman, and I don't think anyone really cares. I especially don't, and for Hartnett, he may not have the face, but standing in at 6'3", I definitely think he could have the physique with a little training. As much as I love the idea, I just do not see it happening though, as he is about to turn 48 in July, and even though I think the DCU is open to someone in their 40s, I'm sure the hope is they are like maybe 43 or 44 when The Brave and the Bold comes out, not in their early 50s. An actor who might be the perfect age for the role is Oliver Jackson-Cohen, someone who impressed in The Invisible Man and was solid in The Haunting of Hill House. In more recent years, he's probably known best for his work on the Apple TV series Surface, which sadly I have not not watched outside of clips, but I've only heard great things about him in the show. He is an incredibly handsome actor who absolutely has the look of a Bruce Wayne, and he's already quite solidly built, where I think he could absolutely step in the role today and look like a pretty solid Batman, but with a few months of intense training, he could be a quite physically imposing Dark Knight. I wish Cohen was in a bit more theatrically, especially over the last few years, so I could simply see him in more and feel more confident stamping him as a great actor, but everything I have seen Cohen in, he's been pretty damn good in, so I'm pretty confident in his acting ability. I definitely think he could be a prime candidate for this role, as he's currently 38, which I think is about the perfect age for the Batman in the DCU. He's kind of known like Cornsweet and Alcock. I would say definitely less so than Alcock, and probably less so than David Cornsweet, unless you're really tapped into the Batman fan cast discussion on social media, which I do think is something that DC likes, as so far they have not landed any huge star to play any major superhero role, and I think Oliver Jackson-Cohen makes a lot of sense, and I'd be pretty excited by the choice if he ended up being cast. The last name I want to talk about is Lee Pace, because I just really like him as an actor, and I honestly think he'd probably be a pretty great choice for Batman. However, he once again falls into the probably too old for the role age bucket, as he is currently 47, but maybe, just maybe, Gunn would be willing to let an old friend still get the role, even though he is probably older than what they are looking for. I mean, could you just imagine his voice as Batman? I mean, come on, that would be terrifying. Actually, now that I think of it, maybe it's honestly too deep, hence why a lot of the time he is voicing villains, but I truly like Lee Pace about everything I've ever seen him in. I definitely think he can have the look of a Bruce Wayne, and yes, like many actors, he would need to put on a little weight to truly look the part in the suit, but as we've seen in the past, he certainly is capable of doing that, and I have no doubt he'd be able to do it for Batman. Alright, so now it's time to finally decide who should be Batman in the DCU. One small caveat I want to give outside of my top 3 is what I'm calling option 4, and it honestly might be the most exciting and my personal favorite, and that is casting a complete unknown in the role that barely anyone knows. Of course, there are some somewhat unknown actors in the eyes of the general audience that we talked about today, but if you follow DC and specifically anything like Fancast, you have almost certainly heard of all of the names we have talked about. I think it's very possible James Gunn and company could decide to go completely off the grid, kind of like what they did with Clayface, and if that's what happens, I give it a huge thumbs up as a bold swing for the fences. However, now into my top 3, which is comprised of Tom Brittney, Oliver Jackson-Cohen, and Nate Mann. Now, if I'm being 100% honest with you, I don't have any proof of this, but I honestly do think Tom Brittney is the most likely to get this role, as I think he is almost perfect age-wise. He has a great build that I think definitely fits for Batman. I like the voice, and he has the type of unknown quality DC seems to like, where somebody may be known slightly if you really are into TV and movies, or if you follow things like Fancast, but if you asked a random person on the street, they would almost certainly have no idea who Tom Brittney is, similar to like David Cornsweet before he was casted as Superman. However, the biggest reason I say he's probably the most likely is because James Gunn already openly sings Brittney's praises, and I'm sure ever since Brittney's great audition as Superman, Gunn has thought about ways to bring Brittney into the DCU. I really do think this could be Brittney's to lose, but I do think the race will still be tough. Nate Mann, I think, has a great look to him, and I think he was just absolutely great in Masters of the Air. I would love if he was given a chance because I do think he could be great, but I think there's a good chance he's just a bit too young, and standing in at 6 foot, he may be a bit on the small end for a Batman that is supposed to still look formidable next to a 6'4" Superman. That of course leaves Oliver Jackson-Cohen, who is going to be my choice for Batman in the DCU. I think he's got the look, the build, the voice, and I think he showcased immense talent as an actor with his ability to display trauma and emotion. He can also be charming and charismatic, which I think makes it very likely he could be a good Bruce Wayne, and he's also shown the ability to be dark, intimidating, and a bit terrifying, which makes me pretty confident he could also excel in the suit. Like I said earlier, no matter who James Gunn decides to cast as Batman, I'm going to be pretty confident in their ability to deliver, especially if it's any of the actors that we talked about in this video. But for me, I think I would probably be the most excited and confident if Oliver Jackson-Cohen is the one who got the role. However, now I want to know, who would you like to see play Batman in the DCU? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video.